There's very few places on this planet that have this type of environment. But the demand on dairy-based protein in the world is only going to increase. And there's not enough land on the planet to do this type of dairying around the world. It's just the environment is not going to be that way. The land's not there.
So I guess on a global scale, the conclusion would be dairy is not sustainable.
Unless we start digging up houses and putting pastures back. And the only way to start digging up houses and development is to have less people. We only know that population is going to continue to grow. So that means more commercial dairying, I'm sure.
Either that or some low demand.
Yeah, or some other product's going to take its place. I mean, we see there's all sorts of soy milks and almond milk and a lot of other products that are coming out in different blends. Where you take juices and proteins, and I think you'll see a lot more of that.
He was right. How could cow's milk be sustainable? For when 1 gallon of milk, it takes upwards of 1,000 gallons of water to produce. Almost a third of the planet's land is becoming desert, with a vast majority due to livestock grazing. Doing research on grass-fed livestock, I kept coming across the work of Allan Savory. Savory claims that the best way to reverse this desertification is to actually graze more animals. This reminded me of Oceana saying the best way to help fish is to eat fish. This is the same man, during the 1950s, working as a research officer for the game department of what is now Zimbabwe, came up with a theory that actually elephants were the cause of desertification there. His solution was convincing the government to kill 40,000 elephants. Yet, after 14 years of relentless slaughter, the conditions only got worse. His theory was wrong. The culling finally ended, but not until tens of thousands of elephants and their families were killed. This is not someone I would ever take ecological advice from. It turns out the cattle industry is having the same effect on wildlife in the United States.
The government has been rounding up horses en masse, and we now have more wild horses and burros in government holding facility, 50,000 wild horses and burros in government holding facilities than we have free on the range. Basically, you have ranchers who get to graze on our public lands for a fraction of the going rate. So they're getting like this huge tax subsidy. It's about 1/15 of the going rate. And what the Bureau of Land Management has to do is say how much forage and water is on the land. And then they divvy it up. They give so much to the cows, so much to wildlife, and so much to the wild horses and burros. And what we see is the lion's share of the forage and water is going to the livestock industry. And then they scapegoat the horses and burros and say, oh, there are too many horses and burros, let's remove them. I always tell people that wild horses and burros are just one of the victims of the management of our public lands for livestock, because we also see the predator killing going on. We know wolves are now being targeted by ranchers to get rid of wolves. USDA has aircraft, and all they do is aerial gunning of predators. So all a rancher does is call up and say, I've got a coyote here. They'll come over and they'll shoot the coyote, or they'll shoot the mountain lion, or they'll shoot the bobcat. And this is all for ranching.
In Washington State, after cattle were found to be attacked on public lands where they were grazing under permit, Washington State decided to kill the entire wedgeback of wolves. And those wolves were not introduced. They had in-migrated from Canada, but they're no longer there.
And it starts at the local level with the Bureau of Land Management, but then it goes all the way to Congress. And we see Congress, sitting there willing to allow this type of mismanagement of our public lands to continue.
It is the insistence of and the lobbying power of the animal agriculture industry that continues to see wolves killed, continues to see an insistence that predators be maintained at a low level that does not benefit ecosystems.
I've seen so many pieces of land, I've looked at so many environmental assessments from the Bureau of Land Management where they say the rangelands are not meeting standards. And they say straight up, livestock grazing is a cause for not meeting range standards, and yet they will continue to allow livestock grazing.
They're at the very core of making sure that cougars are treed by hounds, and that wolf packs are run down, and that hunting seasons are opened up year-round, and that traps are set so that they can suffer.
If anyone cares about wild horses and wildlife and public lands and the environment, you can't ignore the livestock, the impact, the negative impact that livestock raising is having on our public lands and the rest.
I've added up the costs of animal food production that the producers don't actually bear themselves. These are the hidden costs or the externalized costs that they impose on society. And those are in categories like healthcare, environmental damage, subsidies, damage to fisheries, and even cruelty. If you take those externalized costs, which are about $414 billion, if the meat and dairy industries were required to internalize those costs, if they had to bear those costs themselves, the costs of the retail prices of meat and dairy would skyrocket. So a $5 carton of eggs would go to $13. A $4 Big Mac would go to $11. Whether you eat meat or not, whether you're an omnivore or an herbivore, you are paying part of the costs of somebody else's consumption. So that when somebody goes into a McDonald's and buys a Big Mac for $4, there's another $7 of costs that's imposed on society. I'm paying that. You're paying that, whether you eat meat or not.
When you really look at who's benefiting and who's lobbied for this system of agriculture, it's the largest food producers in the country and the largest meat producers. And once they become so large and wealthy, then they can dictate the federal policies around producing food because they have so much political power.
I knew I needed to talk to an animal agriculture lobby group to see what they had to say. If they could silence the government, are they influencing and possibly have connections to these environmental groups as well? The Animal Agriculture Alliance, one of the biggest livestock lobby groups in America, has agreed to an interview. Greenpeace won't give us an interview, but Animal Agriculture Alliance has agreed to an interview. Now that is saying something.
People hear the word GMOs, and that's a really scary term. And again, I think agriculture has kind of struggled to explain what that means. But in reality, what we've done is to use technology to make advancements in how we raise crops and how we raise animals. We're not going to feed the world, going back to how it was 100 years ago, where all the animals were, pasture fed. We didn't just move animals inside and just implement these large vertically integrated systems because of sustainability. It certainly reduces the environmental impact while improving animal well-being and food safety.
So that they're saying that animals like it just as much being inside. The chickens and the cows like being just as much inside as pasture grass-fed.
In a lot of cases, it's been a significant improvement in their well-being, just in terms of the amount of care they can get, individualized care.
Does the meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to environmental nonprofits?
I don't know that I would want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't.
I don't know.
I don't know that we would know what they donate to or don't donate to.
Does meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to, say, Greenpeace?
Again, I don't know that I would feel comfortable.
Hey, sorry we didn't get back to you earlier. I have some bad news. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns that we have to pull out.
Why was this subject so controversial? The first person I could think to speak with was Howard Lyman, who had been sued by cattlemen for simply speaking the truth about animal agriculture on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I was born on the largest dairy farm in the state of Montana in 1938. Grew up my entire life on a livestock farm. Went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture. Came back and started a mega agriculture endeavor where I had 10,000 acres of crop, 7,000 head of cattle, and about 30 employees. So I spent 45 years of my life in animal agriculture, and so I've been there, done that. When I was on the Oprah show, we had the food disparagement law. Now, the food disparagement law, in my opinion, was unconstitutional, but what it basically said that it was against the law to say something you knew to be false about a perishable commodity. I didn't say anything on the Oprah show I thought to be false. I went there and told the truth. Now, it took 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up extricating myself from the suits from the cattle industry. But if I was to go on the Oprah show today, say exactly the same thing today that I said back then, I would be guilty. And for me, when they were talking about the food disparagement law, it was the fact of whether I told the truth or not. You can go today and tell the truth, and you will be guilty. Because if you cause a disruption in the profits of the animal industry, you're guilty under the Patriot Act.
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Of course. If you don't realize right now that you're putting your neck on the chopping block, you know, you better take that camera and throw it away.
The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. I think most people in this country are aware of the influence of